that. So just to put it in perspective, the Russian economy is the size of the state of California, is maybe even smaller. It's equivalent to Spain or Italy. So their ability to sustain the sort of broad defense posture the way the United States does across multiple potential theaters is limited. Nonetheless, they have shown the capability of spending more on that than wise policymakers would, because it's what gives them influence. Certainly the nuclear stockpile is a different situation. It raises their influence above what their GDP would justify. All that said, the one area that I don't know it's been discussed and falls, which what I think is an emerging threat, if not an already existent one, is the use of asymmetrical means on behalf of the Russians in any conflict. And we saw evidence of that both in Crimea and in Ukraine, also in Georgia in 2008, and the sort of electronic warfare that targets critical infrastructure, command and control. Obviously, there's an element of disinformation and propaganda that comes associated with that as well. But this is an asymmetrical means of either escalating to de-escalate and or denying your potential adversary some of their more advanced capabilities, and it is one that is quite cost-effective, dollar for dollar. So I don't know if that's been talked about enough, but perhaps, and any of you are prepared to kind of talk a little bit more in depth about some of the means and measures used on behalf of the Russians in their intervention in Crimea and Ukraine, and before that in Georgia, in terms of the use of electronic warfare to target critical infrastructure, both civilian and military, and of course command and control and the like, because I think that ultimately will pose a threat first from Russia, but from other adversaries around the world as well as the years go on.
Thank you, Senator. I would say I completely agree with you. I think you see an evolution in terms of Russian doctrine from a largely conventional war in Georgia to a unconventional war where they use special forces, little green men in Ukraine, to a military intelligence organized coup d'etat in Montenegro that was luckily foiled, to political subversion campaigns across the United States and Western Europe. So they are both expanding the geographic scope of their gray zone operations, but they are also increasingly moving from conventional military force to more covert subversive measures. And I think it's because it's cheaper, it's easier, and it's likely more effective, because in both Ukraine and Georgia, while they were able to stall Euro-Atlantic integration, the populations have become rather pro-Western, have stayed pro-Western or become even more so, and have developed some hostility towards Moscow. So,
and just to be clear, obviously, that's been extensively discussed, and I think it's very relevant and a big threat. I'm going beyond just that. I'm talking about the ability to shut down power grids, the ability to shut down command and control, the ability to shut down the banking or attack the banking sector, the sorts of critical infrastructure attack that we saw evidence of, some of that in the Ukraine, Crimea situation, saw some of that even before that in the Georgia 2007, 2008 timeframe. That's one that's not getting a lot of attention, but I think it poses a real threat, and I have no doubt we would see deployed in any sort of European, Eastern European conflict or potential conflict, especially nations that perhaps have not invested in hardening against that sort of intrusion.
well, that is primarily, Senator, a cyber threat, more so than an electronic warfare threat, but it has been deployed, as you say, in Georgia and Ukraine. And we know the Russians have penetrated a lot of U.S. government networks, those networks of our allies as well. So their ability, potentially, to be able to shut down critical infrastructure is enormous. I mean, they have shut down they have shut down electric power plants in Ukraine. They have penetrated networks in other allied countries, including Ministry of Defense networks in a lot of our allies. And so this is something that we need to work on both here domestically, but also in terms of building up the cyber defenses of our allies. It's critically important. This is potentially one of the most lethal threats that we face, even if it is non-kinetic.
And just in closing, I would say that the proper terminology is probably cyber. The reason why I always kind of describe it a little differently is because when people think of cyber in the public, they're thinking, oh, they're going to hack my emails. This is way more than hacking emails. We're talking about shutting down potentially a power grid and the like, and in a conflict, you can imagine, everyone could imagine how debilitating that would be to any nation state, particularly some of these Eastern European NATO allies that would probably be on the front lines of any such effort.
A healthcare system, for example, Senator Rubio.
They just did it right now. There you go. There you go.
You spoke it, and it happened.
There you go.